Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today we're sticking with Acts17Apologetics again, this time with a phenomenon that he dubs the Dawkins dilemma. So let's see what that's all about, shall we?
In his lecture series, Growing Up in the Universe, Richard Dawkins explains the purpose of life.
We began
Holy shit, it's a young Dawkins. Looking good, Richard.
by asking what flowers were for. We considered various answers and eventually concluded that flowers are for the same thing as everything else in the living kingdoms, for spreading copy-me programs about, written in DNA language.
The purpose of all living things, says Dawkins, is to spread copy-me programs written in DNA language. DNA is basically a set of instructions for building things, but the things that are built are ultimately for making more copies of DNA. So the purpose of living things is to make copies of DNA.
I can see by the condescending look on your face that you don't agree with that statement, but you actually did a decent job of rewording it. I'd say that yes, that is accurate.
Flowers are for spreading around instructions for making flowers. Bees are for spreading around instructions for making bees. Elephants for spreading instructions for making elephants. And birds for making more birds.
Clearly, this would include human beings. What's the purpose of you and me and Richard Dawkins?
Our DNA builds its own self-copying machinery. This is what we are. We are machines built by DNA whose purpose is to make more copies of the same DNA.
In the study guide that accompanies the lecture series, we read, "We are machines for propagating DNA, and the propagation of DNA is a self-sustaining process. It is every living object's sole reason for living." Your sole reason for living is to make copies of a molecule. You're a machine for propagating DNA.
Essentially, yeah. You gonna get to your point anytime soon?
Why is this interesting? Well, the people who tell us that our purpose in life is to make copies of DNA happen to be some of the worst people in the world when it comes to making copies of DNA. They're just really, really bad at propagating DNA. In the West, many atheists are convinced that atheism is rapidly expanding. But we shouldn't confuse whining and trolling with expanding. While many people are declaring themselves to be atheists, birth rates among atheists are so low that the atheist population is actually shrinking as a percentage of the world population.
Are you seriously about to use our ability as a species to realize that overpopulation is a problem that needs to be dealt with, and the fact that atheists are the best at reining in the natural desire to reproduce in order to help deal with this problem, as an argument against atheism?
A 2015 Pew Research study titled The Future of World Religions, Population Growth Projections 2010 to 2050 is subtitled Why Muslims Are Rising Fastest and the Unaffiliated Are Shrinking as a Share of the World's Population. The unaffiliated group includes atheists and agnostics. Atheists and agnostics are shrinking as a share of the world's population.
Yes, and do you know why? It's because we encourage the use of contraceptives, which religions discourage. Having fewer children is a good choice in today's world, as our current population growth rate is unsustainable.
For you atheists who are yelling, "But so many people are becoming atheists in America and Europe, surely we must be taking over the world," the study takes conversions into account, but concludes that by 2050, atheists, agnostics, and other people who do not affiliate with any religion, though increasing in countries such as the United States and France, will make up a declining share of the world's total population. In terms of the total number of adherents, both Christianity and Islam will continue growing. But notice that the number of Muslims is growing even more rapidly. When considered as a percentage of the world's population, Christianity is expected to stay roughly the same, while Islam is expected to increase significantly.
I'm not sure what you're trying to get at here. It kinda seems like you're saying that the religion, or lack thereof, which has the most kids to indoctrinate is the winner. But that places your religion on the losing team in the long run. And do you not see how sick it is that Islam and Christianity are basically only growing at this point by way of childhood indoctrination? Would it not be better to raise kids without religion and teach them rational skepticism in order to decide for themselves which religion is true? If your religion is actually the true one, there should be no problem with this, as it would be the natural winner in most cases.
What about atheists and agnostics? Well, the number of unaffiliated will increase slightly from 1.13 billion to 1.23 billion, but that growth rate is much slower than the growth rate of several other groups. The result is that, as a percentage of the world's population, atheism and agnosticism are declining. Why are they declining? Low birth rates.
Oh, would you look at that? The religions that discourage contraceptives the most are the ones that have the highest birth rate in a world that will not be able to sustain their children. Is that supposed to be a good thing?
The fertility rate of the unaffiliated is just 1.7, while the fertility rate among Muslims is 3.1. In Dawkinsian terms, atheists and agnostics are poor propagators of DNA. As a group, Muslims are the best propagators of DNA. If you'd like a quick comparison, Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Daniel Dennett, Christopher Hitchens, Neil deGrasse Tyson, Stephen Hawking, Michael Shermer, Lawrence Krauss, and Bill Nye the Science Guy combined have produced fewer children than Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, this group of guys that cares about global issues like overpopulation had fewer children than a guy who cares about having his ideology spread through as many people as possible. Wonder why that could be.
Now, remind me, what's the purpose of human beings, according to Richard Dawkins?
This is what we are. We are machines built by DNA whose purpose is to make more copies of the same DNA.
So if Islam leads to increased production of DNA, it's clear that Islam helps human beings fulfill their sole purpose in life.
That's actually not a bad argument as to why religion is so persistent in the evolutionary process, especially the ones with commands to be fruitful and multiply.
Atheism, by contrast, is detrimental to human purpose. Apart from contracting some sort of debilitating disease, nothing keeps human beings from fulfilling their purpose, like becoming an atheist.
If you actually read any of Dawkins' work, you might have a better grasp on the situation. It's not just about reproducing itself, it's about long-term survival. And it's about the survival of specific genes rather than of DNA as a whole. This allows for altruistic genes to assist in their survival by making sacrifices to help people with similar genes. The atheist worldview takes the long-term survival of the species into account and realizes that at this point fewer children would be much better for the species and their genes in the long run.
Not according to me, according to Richard Dawkins. This realization leads to what we'll call the Dawkins dilemma. On one horn, if our purpose is to propagate DNA, then atheism is an obstacle, an impediment, a hindrance, a stumbling block. Atheism should therefore be rejected for its harmful impact on humanity.
No, see, that's called an argument from consequences. It's a logical fallacy. If I were to grant you that you are perfectly correct about atheism being harmful to humanity by inhibiting the spread of our DNA, that has no bearing on whether or not it's actually true. That would be like saying, if gravity exists, then falling from a height onto a hard surface would hurt. Therefore, gravity does not exist. It's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense.
Here atheists will cry, but atheism is true. Sorry, but DNA doesn't care about what's true. The only criterion here is getting more copies of a molecule into the next generation, and atheism fails miserably at this task. This means that atheists like Richard Dawkins should abandon atheism and convert to Islam, an ideology that makes DNA's wildest dreams come true.
Again, if I grant everything you say as being correct, it still doesn't matter. All that means is that atheists are less likely to reproduce, and if there is an atheist gene, it will eventually go extinct. It has no bearing on what is true. As for me, I would rather believe truth than lies, even if that means my descendants will be fewer than yours.
On the other horn, if atheists like Richard Dawkins don't want to convert to Islam, they need a purpose that goes beyond the propagation of DNA.
And as a free-thinking atheist, I am free to determine for myself what my life's purpose will be. Isn't that wonderful?
They need a purpose that transcends biology. They need a purpose that just isn't available on atheism. Hence, if Dawkins doesn't want to convert to Islam, he needs to reject atheism for failing to provide a purpose higher than the biological.
You're confusing two ideas here. The purpose of DNA is to make more copies of itself. And to accomplish this purpose, it has evolved these human bodies that we run. These bodies have the ability to do things other than just reproduce, and as such can come up with their own purposes in life. So the purpose of DNA and the purpose of humans who possess the DNA do not have to be the exact same thing.
Now, for you Muslims who are watching, cheering when I say that Islam is growing rapidly, you should click on this video to see why Islam is growing rapidly. Here's a hint. Due to the poor treatment of women in Islam, many Muslim women have little to do in life besides making babies, and this leads to high birth rates among Muslims, thus the growth of Islam. Since DNA doesn't care how Muslim men treat their wives, so long as the DNA molecule is replicated, Islam's poor treatment of women ends up making it the ultimate ideology for propagating DNA.
Watching your doublethink is really very fascinating. Do you not realize that a good chunk of why Christianity is growing so fast is because of the same thing to a lesser degree? I mean, like several denominations' refusal to let women have control over their own bodies in the form of contraception is demeaning towards women. Like, there seems to be a correlation on that chart you showed earlier with birth rate and the treatment of women. And personally, I'm proud to be on the end of that chart that treats women with respect.